Alright, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today I want to show off my current build of Monofire Rush, and I sort of plan to start by going over the core of cards that I think you should probably be playing at 3 no matter which direction you want to take the deck. And from there go over what I chose to round out my list with, and then cover maybe some of the alternatives that you could be playing that are worth trying out as well. I think sort of from a broad perspective, Monofire Rush is probably one of the better decks in Open, I would say. It does have a lot of variance in terms of its matchups and how it plays out game to game. It's going to be highly dependent on your draws, your opponent's draws, and the shields, like a lot of matchups are, of course. I think between the top tier decks in Kaijudo, there's a lot of kind of like 50-50-ish decks. And Monofire Rush certainly adheres to that kind of overarching principle. But yeah, there was a period where I thought it might have been the best deck. I was kind of on that bandwagon for a little bit. Just I don't know. I think it's probably favored against dragons, most builds of dragons. It's favored against some of the tempo decks, like or what we call tempo decks in Kaijudo. It's pretty good against like control even as well. Like that's what I'm saying. Like the problem is just like the variance can get you when just because on a strategic perspective, the way the deck operates, it is just prone to swingy matchups. But who knows? Maybe it's the best deck. I think Monofire might struggle a little bit with some of the other rush decks. I think like Mono Light actually kind of handles this deck somewhat decently from past experience. I'm not sure if that even holds up anymore, but anyways, let's jump into the core. Alright, so I guess we'll start off with the Blaze Belcher, of course. So Blaze Belcher, obviously the only attacking one drop that they gave us for fire in Kaijudo, and probably for good reason. This card really plays into what the deck is trying to do, which I guess is a good time to talk about kind of that. I would say the goal of this deck is to spend as much mana as you can on as many things as you can within like probably a limited time frame. And in that sense, it's very much like if anything's a tempo deck in Kaijudo, it's probably going to be Monofire Rush. Like the whole goal of the deck is, again, it's all about spending mana, developing a board presence, and doing more things than your opponent. Even if those things are kind of weak cards, like just a 1000 that has to attack, just that's a weak card. But it's all done within the context of playing cheap cards. Like the power of the cards comes from the fact that it's cheap and you're leveraging your ability to spend more mana than your opponent. And yeah, you're basically flying in the face of card advantage. In a game where card advantage can be given to your opponent by attacking them and progressing towards beating them in the game, by taking an aggressive role, you're taking a risk in that you're giving up the card advantage battle, especially in a deck that doesn't really have ways to generate card advantage, unlike other decks that might play like Finbar, Broodmother, etc. So, yeah, I would say that's also a big reason why this deck can be such a glass cannon, is because you're taking a role, like I said, you're going to be at the cost of your card advantage, trying to beat your opponent on the axis of tempo, I guess, is from a broad perspective. So when Shield Blasts come into account, you run the risk of just losing that tempo advantage. So let's say you play Blaze Belcher into a 2-drop, right? And then you attack their shield, you give them a card, they pass maybe, and then you go turn 3, you maybe play like another 2-drop or something, attack, and then you hit like an Arbiter, and all of a sudden, you just hit an Arbiter, and then all of a sudden, like, they've got to cast a spell. So maybe you've spent, like, over those first 3 turns, you've spent 5 mana on 3 things, and they spend no mana on one thing, and maybe you equate that to, like, the Arbiter as a 2500 that taps 2 things. Maybe it's worth, like, 3 mana or something, or even if you want to cast it at 7. Like, they spent a bunch of mana, and they get to establish their own board presence, right? Like now they're matching your board presence because they get a creature, they get to eat one of your creatures, and they're they're also getting free mana from their shields. So that's why this deck is so high variance, because you've sacrificed the card advantage game. By breaking that first shield on turn 2, you've given them more resources than you for sure, right? And now, on top of that, when they get free spells out of their shields, they're getting to match you on the tempo perspective, or on the tempo axis as well. So that's why this deck is such a glass cannon in a lot of senses. Carrying on, I would say definitely Bodyguard. It doesn't quite serve the purpose, because that whole context of sort of conceding the card advantage axis, like rather than fighting your opponent on how many spells can I cast mana on, or how many spells could I be casting mana on, you're asking yourself, how many have I actually been able to cast mana on? How much mana have I actually been able to spend, right? That's kind of the axis you're choosing to fight on. But it's all done with the goal of attacking and killing your opponent. So Jet Flame Bodyguard, while you can spend it as a 1-drop, it's really not accomplishing that goal in terms of actually killing your opponent, unless you pair it with like the Evo creatures, which is why it's in the deck. You could argue if only 6 evolution creatures are really core and you're not playing anymore, that it might not even be worth playing in the deck at all. But I've found it's probably worth it. It can be like a high variance card, and that it's going to end up in mana a lot of the time when you don't have your evolutions. But if not, it just amplifies the power level of these cards, and I think it's worth playing in the deck. And especially if you're going to be playing more than 6 evolutions, it's in for sure. Flame Spinner is, I think, the mandatory 2-drop, just because, I mean, it's the one with the best late game application. Just being a pseudo fast attack, like just being able to pair it so well with Wildfire Valkyrie. When you're chipping in with Valkyries, they return to your hand, and then the following turn you get to pair it with a Flame Spinner. Like, it just offers so much play. Even being able to play it as a cheap creature to follow up a Jet Thrust starter that's still on board, like, Flame Spinner just offers the most power out of your 2-drop. So that's why I'm choosing to play it. This one is just a placeholder. This could be pretty much whatever 2-drop you see fit. If you're playing Dracon Evolutions, of course this is going to be Dracon. But if not, it could be probably whatever evolution or whatever cheap creature you think is the best. I think it's all marginal between them, that it's sort of up to preference. Jethro Starter and Valkyrie are just 2 of the very important cards in this deck. Just having a 3-drop fast attack, these cards are pretty much always going to be part of like your best draws, so just you want to be playing them. They're just the cheapest fast attackers. They can be obviously a little bit weak in the face of some of the blockers like Lemon and Strider, but that said, again, they're just part of some of your best draws, so you need to be maxing out on these. The evolutions that I think are mandatory are Torhelm and Conflagration. Torhelm just offers a lot in a variety of matchups, just as almost like a removal, like another card that can attack into blockers and just straight up answer blockers like Strider and Lemon and get them out of the way for your cheap creatures to follow up. And on top of that, it can be difficult for some decks to answer, and like especially decks that might be relying on like Psychic Predator and maybe Lyra even to answer some evolutions and bigger things. This card just lets you continue to be proactive and push through their shields through those cards. And on top of that, of course, it pairs well as just a makeshift fast attack when you have so many cheap creatures in your deck as well. So that's Torhelm. Conflagration is just like probably the most powerful top end card. Just a double breaking evolution is always important, and one that can answer blockers as well is very crucial. So, I mean, it's just the most powerful top end card that you could play. And then Comet Missile, just the most efficient answer to blockers. So obviously blockers give this deck problems. It just lets you clear them out of the way so you can make progress on your opponent's shields with some of your cheaper creatures and fast attackers. So that's what I think is kind of the standard core. You could argue like some more cards should be a part of this core, but this is sort of what I've identified as the cards you should at least be playing 3 of. continue on Gila Flame, or Gila Flame, you could probably argue this should be core as well. The reason I didn't include it is just because I could see some decks only playing 2, just because like you might want to trim down to make room for more evolutions and cheap bait creatures. But that said, I think you should just be playing 3. Like it attacks through a lot of the blockers that people will play, and it just gives you more top end fast attackers. Same with War Chief. Like this card is probably core to Mono Fire, but you might be splashing Storm Sparks or something that might make you not play this card. But these cards, like basically I would say like you really want to push through their shields with a lot of your aggressive plays, and then at some point your opponent's going to somewhat stabilize, and then from there you just want to be top decking fast attack after fast attack. So I think you should just be maxing out on all the fast attacks that you can. And like these cards are going to end up in mana early somewhat to play your early creatures, but then you can always count, when you have so many, you can always count on drawing more top end later. So that is that. Like even you might say like it's a lot to spend with between Gila Flame and Wildfire. You might have too many cards that don't stick to the board, but it's just so important to have them, especially when you might be sending some in to trade with blockers, or your opponent might be discarding them with Like it's just so good to. A lot of games come down to top decking a fast attack or not, so you just want to maximize those. Continuing on, I just have another 2-drop Bronca. I think it's just the best Dracon 2-drop, I think, honestly, even without Burn Claw. Like 2000 power, in my opinion, is the best ability. I think like Cliff Cutter and Ember Adept are another couple of cards that would be commonly played, but with my build, spoiler, I don't play like Laser Arm or any of the Dracon evolutions, so at least not in this build. And yeah, those like you just don't. You don't have enough cards or evolutions, sorry, to make Cliff Cutter most consistently like a 3000 power creature, and on top of that, Ember Adept I think is just 1000 power, so it's just a little bit too big of a drawback, and the ability you don't get enough value out of it. So I think 2000 power is so much better. Like being able to not get traded with, like it doesn't let your opponent make their Cyber Scamps live. Like if they get to play a 2-drop that answers your 2-drop, that's kind of bad for you, right? So you want to make their Cyber Scamps dead if you can. So you don't want to be playing like a 1000 power 2-drop. Like Cyber Scamp, Manapod Beetle, Nyx, those are all examples. This also beats over Lux as opposed to getting attacked over by Lux, which can be relevant. Same with like something like Targusher. I just think 2000 power again is just the best ability on a 2-drop that you should be playing. And then the other 2-drop I'm playing, I should have revealed earlier, is Lava Leaper. Sort of the same vein. 1000 power might be a detriment again in the face of like maybe Drill Storm, but it just doesn't get attacked by things, and I think that's important. So those are the 2-drops I've chosen to play. Like I said, if you were to play more Dracons, obviously this card could just be cut for more Burn Claws and then whatever other 2-drop you identify is good. Next up is Ashen Tribute. This card is just more Comet Missiles. I mean, if Comet Missile is one of the core cards and one of the important cards in your deck, it seems crazy that 3 would be the right number, right? Like, I think at the very least 4. I think 5 might be the sweet spot. I could very likely see like the third one being another 2-drop that can actually attack. But I just wanted to maximize my ability to see them. Like, it might be another inconsistent card that adds a little more variance because now I'm playing more cards that might be dead or might be situational, and now I'm playing like a bunch of top end and a bunch of situational cards, so I have way too many things that I need to mana early, not enough things to play early. So that might be the case, but even then, like I just think just making sure you have access to them, and they pair so well with the fast attacks, being able to 2 mana destroy a blocker with either one, and then pair that up with the 3 mana Valkyrie or a Jet Their Starter, just to clear their blocker and push them for a shield in the same turn. It just great removal. So I'm trying the 3. I don't know if that's the right number, but that's what I've been playing. And to round out the deck is just another fast attack, Lava Racer. Now this is another variance card, but I mean it's going to end up in mana a lot of the time. I don't think you're really casting this in the early game. Even if you have no turn 2 play, and you have this card, I don't think you're going to be casting it that often in that situation. Um, but that said, I feel like this slot is going to be kind of a situationally powerful card no matter what. And my opinion on this one specifically is it just needs the least to go right for you. Like, it's just another super live draw, just another fast attack draw that you can have. And as opposed to playing something like Draglide, this card just pairs so much better in that it can couple with Flame Spinner, it can couple with the Comet Missiles, and it just lets you. Just 2 mana is so much more important. And a lot of the time when you're just hoping to draw into a fast deck, anyways, like the fact that it dies doesn't really matter too much. Like, they're probably just going to attack over whatever you attack with if that's relevant. And if you're gaming them, then you're gaming them. So that's my thoughts on this. I think like the direct card that this might be competing with is like Laser Arm Dracon, which I think both are situational cards. The Laser Arms, it was a card I was actually super down on. Like it was always kind of standard before you had as many good cards to put in Mono Fire. It was just kind of part of the core. You had to play it, and then I kind of got to this place where I was like, wow, this card's terrible. It's a liability, very situational. I shouldn't be playing this card, and I've kind of come around and from that, like it's very much a card that you just have to understand. It's going to be like a high variance card. You're going to put it in mana a lot of the time, and you're going to be just using it for certain situations that come up when it's going to be good, and you're also going to be it's kind of matchup dependent and situationally dependent. But my reasoning for Lava Racer was just like I said, you don't have to be like, it's a better draw or a better top deck, and less has to be going right in those situations. Like, when your situation comes up when the card is good for something like Laser Arm, you also have to be able to actually play it, right? Like, you have to actually have the bait that you can evolve on top of having the situation line up. So this card, you just have to be able to cast it, right? Which is going to happen. So that's kind of my thought on that situation. Like, again, Laser Arm is a card I've kind of come around on now, where I understand that it's just kind of a situationally powerful card, and the power very well might be worth it. Like, you just kind of need access to those big double breakers anyways. Like, that's just something you should have access to, and that very well may be the case. But I just haven't found... like, I think it's a marginal difference between the two cards anyways, so... I've just been trying out Lava Racer because I've played more Laser Arm historically. But yeah, like I said, you just really have to know how to use Laser Arm. You're very likely like not gonna evolve onto it. If you just go, if you're not evolving it on Jet Flame, it's just very weak a lot of the time. Like, you'd much rather play many different opportunities of plays than evolving like your 2-drop that can already attack into a Laser Arm. Just because it flies in the face of what this deck was trying to do. As I was saying, like, you're really trying to spend as much mana on things as you can and do more things than your opponent. But Laser Arm really, like, you're killing your own creature. Like, you're not really developing your board presence in sort of going wide. You're just and creating more threats that your opponent has to answer. You're just upgrading a threat. You're just enchanting it to be something bigger. Right? But it doesn't make your deck harder to answer, and it doesn't really make it so you're doing more things, right? In that kind of sense. So that was sort of my thought. It just kind of flies in the face, and it leaves you even more susceptible to variance, because now if your opponent answers it with the Bone Blades, you just set back so far in tempo, because now you put the 2-drop you developed into the 3-drop you've played. They can answer both those plays with one card. They can answer 5 mana with one card, right? Even with something like a Strider. I can't tell you how many games I won because my opponent would go turn 2 Dracon, turn 3, evolve their Dracon into Laser Arm, attack into my Strider. I would just take the attack, draw 2 cards for free, and then untap, and then I would just get to trade my Strider for 2 cards. So now I've traded a Strider, 2 mana, for 2 cards and 5 mana, and they've also given me 2 cards to boot. So like, they lose their whole, you just throw all your eggs in one basket, and your whole board presence, your whole tempo advantage, it's just so variance. There's so much variance in how that performs, and it's just such a vulnerable card in that sense. It just makes your strategy so much more vulnerable when you're playing Laser Arm. But that said, the power that it offers, you could very well argue is worth it, and that's like the reason you would play it, is because it's a very situational card, it's a very matchup dependent card, but sometimes you just need the power that it offers, and every other situation you're just going to throw it in mana. And I opted kind of just for a more consistently decent card in Lava Racer, basically in that place. I guess that was most of the thoughts I had. I think I covered most of it. Like, there are some other cards that you could play, like Burn Claw. I just think is not a strong enough card. I when I first was like anti Laser Arm, I was just replacing it with Burn Claw, but I was just kind of Burn Claw is just underwhelming. It doesn't really offer too much. Storm Spark Blast, I guess, is a card you can play, but it's just a even worse draw. And then the fact that of it coming up in shields, like, sure, it can win you some games, but it's that only really even comes up in a certain matchups. Like, when a lot of the decks you're playing are just Andromeda decks anyways, like this card, it's really tough to make work when people can stabilize that hard. So I just don't think Storm Spark is really holds up. I mean, it can be good. Like, when you're not playing any defense like this deck, it can be very easy for your opponent to turn the corner on you and just race you at some point. So having some defense is probably decent, but I just wanted to build like as focused of an aggressive deck as possible, and I think Storm Spark is just a little too medium for me. And I guess the last card I'll cover is just Vortex Trooper, or Fury Wing Trooper. It's another evolution, but I think this card is much worse than Laser Arm. Kind of going back to what I was saying about kind of the situations, like, Laser Arm is a card that's good in some situations, and then it might not line up in all those situations, which makes it a little bit inconsistent. Like, even if the situation does come up where you want to be casting Laser Arm, you might not even have the opportunity to, because you don't have access to the bait, for example. Fury Wing Trooper is even more of an issue in that regard, where it's just much less likely, even in the situation where you do want to play it, that you even have the ability to. So often you're just going to be putting it in mana, and it's just so weak to Bone Blades, even weaker than Laser Arm. It's so weak to Scared Orbital of Gloomhollow. Like, I don't see the appeal to this card at all. It's even more all in. You're investing 3 cards. Like, I just don't see how this lines up in any of your draws. I've played a bit with it, and I was just extremely unimpressed with the card. You're basically just playing like a mountain, and because it's so rare that, again, that the situation comes up where you want to cast it, and you also have the ability to cast it. So that's just so rare. So and it also necessitates pretty much running Sledgebot as well, and I just think, like, running 6 1-drops was too much. Like, even with Torhelm, it was just too many, it's just too many. Like, they don't do anything. It just adds like even with all these top end, all the Comet Missiles, even if you're replacing some of that, you're just getting a much weaker card, like even more of a dead card. Like, when this card is good, it's not that good. And I don't really want to be playing like 6 1-drops. It just adds way too many cards that do nothing or do something kind of important but not super powerful. Whereas the other cards, like, at least these are going to be dead and then but they're super important for the late game. Or they're just going to be mana early and super important for the late game. Sledgebot is just going to be a card that's mana early, except in some cases, and then dead late game, except in some cases. Like, it's just, yeah, you already have Jet Flame for that. Those are my thoughts. I think this video went a little longer, especially for a monofire rush deck, but there's, I think, a fair amount to cover. Anyways, that pretty much does that. As always, let me know what you thought about the deck, maybe what your build of monofire rush is, as well as let me know what more videos you might want to see, if there's anything you're interested in, and subscribe if you do want to see more. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Bye.